Neighbors heard Karen and Chris arguing that night, and the forensic evidence suggests that the argument moved to their bedroom, where it escalated and turned violent. As Chris stood near the window, he struck Karen in the head with a blunt object, at least 3 times, possibly more, producing the cast-off blood trails on the ceiling and walls. Karen fell to the floor, her head striking the bedpost where her blood was also found. As Karen lay bleeding from her massive head injuries, Chris left and went to a local bar. He needed to wait until the neighbors were asleep before removing Karen's body. When he returned home, he wrapped Karen's body in a sheet with a telephone wire and carried her through the house. Luminol tests showed that Karen's head brushed against the door, leaving a blood smear, later cleaned with detergent. Chris then dropped the body onto the floor and dragged it through the side door and out towards the car. He probably disposed of her body late that night in a deserted location. After returning home, Chris removed all visible traces of blood both inside and out. The DNA analysis showed the blood found on the carpet belonged to Karen Campano. And the medical examiner would testify that Karen Campano suffered horrendous head injuries during the attack which no one could survive. Prosecutors were confident of a conviction, even though they didn't have a body or a murder weapon.
Well, I thought it was very likely we might never find the body of the victim.
But just as the preliminary hearing was set to get underway, everything changed. The police found Karen Campano.
This part right here wasn't quite so grown up with all this ivy, and she was laying right down there by that large cottonwood tree, north to south, and there were some blankets around her. There was no greenery at that time. If there had been greenery at that time, you'd never know she was there.
The body lay in a remote area off a major interstate highway until some youngsters on dirt bikes stumbled across it.
All we knew was that we had a female's body out there. We had no idea who it was. Of course, we were hoping it was Karen, but we didn't know.
There was another important find. Police discovered a piece of a check underneath the body. Although they couldn't determine to whom the check was issued, it was from the Shell Oil Company and mailed to someone in New York. The check was for $83.34. Karen Campano was from New York, and her family had a part interest in a gas station there.
This was the first definitive piece that we had, that we knew at that point there was a great possibility that it was Karen. And of course, we wouldn't know for sure until they made identification through dental records and DNA.
Dr. Tom Glass heads the Forensic Odontology Department at the University of Oklahoma. With the help of Karen Campano's dental records and an almost complete set of teeth found in the skull of the body, Dr. Glass's task was fairly easy.
What I do in making the comparison then is simply go frame by frame by frame of the patient's ante-mortem dental x-rays, the x-rays made by the dentist, with the frames of the same areas made on the skeletonized remains. She had a very thorough dentist who documented what he had done. And that documentation allowed the identification in Karen Campano's case to be very profound.
And a DNA analysis of the bone marrow confirmed it. The last doubts had been removed.
Personally, I'm glad she was eventually found because of the family back in New York. I talked to them at length over the phone. Later on during the investigation, I met them. They're really great people, and I really had strong feelings for them hoping one day she would be found so they could put their own fears to rest and give her a decent burial.
And Christopher Campano confessed. The remarkable thing about it, the autopsy confirmed the prosecution's theory of how Karen died. And that theory, remember, was based only on the luminol, the blood spatter analysis, and the blood volume tests.
The maxilla were fractured, the mandibles were fractured, the nose was fractured, the sinuses were fractured, the skull was extensively fractured, yet the cervical spine was intact, and there were only 3 fractures in the ribs. So this is not the hallmark of somebody that's been run over by a car, or somebody who's had a train wreck, or something like that. This is the hallmark of someone who has sustained a severe beating about the head and face. So it was obvious that this was an assault.
Police and forensic science had solved a difficult puzzle.
It all told a story. It was just more of the pieces of the puzzle coming together, even all the way to the end when the body was actually found. It's like, you know, we've got most of the puzzle there. You know what it is. Even with some missing pieces, you know what it is. But then with that body found, it was like that was the very last piece that just fit in there.
In January of 1994, a year and a half after Karen was killed, Christopher Campano went on trial for his life. His defense attorney couldn't refute the forensic findings. They were just too strong.
Once I had decided to make that leap and embrace the evidence, then my task became easier. It was a matter then of looking at the psychological aspects of the case rather than the hard forensics of the case. I suggested to the judge and jury if it was going to be deliberately planned out and methodical, that kind of blood wouldn't be there. There would be none in the house probably. The homicide would have occurred elsewhere if it had been a cold-blooded killing.
The jury bought at least part of the argument. It found Campano guilty of manslaughter, not the first-degree murder charge the state was seeking.
I feel sorry for it. I feel sorry for what I did to her. Can't bring her back, you know. I just got to pay for what I've done.
Christopher Campano was sentenced to 1,000 years in prison.